Thank you very much, Mike. So yeah, a huge welcome to everybody again to our event, Techlash. We're absolutely delighted that John Higgins, the new BCS president, has joined us for this event for Scotland. Although if you're not from Scotland, you are very, very welcome to join. It's just who we had in mind when we were setting this up. If you don't know this already, John was Director General of Tech UK's predecessor, Intellect, and then of Digital Europe. He chairs the Global Digital Foundation, and he's a senior advisor to Burson Cohn and Wolfe and the EU's Intelligent Cities Challenge, which takes me back a bit to some of my past. He was appointed CBE in 2005 for services to the IT industry. So really it's a great privilege to have John in our midst this evening and as part of BCS. So he will spend some time taking us through his thoughts, observations, plans, and then we'll go to Q&A. If you have questions, we would love to hear your voice, so please feel free to keep them to yourselves, and then when we ask for them, to use that button to raise your hand, and we'll come to you, unmute you, so that you can then speak, and it'll be just, as I say, lovely to hear somebody else. If you're a little bit more shy, please feel free to pop your questions in that question box, just like Mike has directed us to. That's probably enough for me, to be honest. Let's get on to the interesting part. So I am just going to hand over to John. The invite, John, it says we've been hugely successful in persuading people of the benefits of tech, but there are rising anxieties about tech and tech-related issues. How has society reacted to those anxieties? How can society build confidence in the IT world? John, over to you, and I'll come back a little later for questions.
Thank you. My control panel disappeared then, but I've now managed to find it and hopefully unmuted myself. Thank you very much, Sharon, and thanks very much, BCS Scotland, for inviting me to speak tonight to you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. That would be great, wouldn't it? It's a trip I'm very sad to be missing, but maybe on another occasion I can come and join you in person in Edinburgh. That would be really great. I was at a meeting of a group I'm involved with. I'm a director of the Museum of East Asian Art, where I live here in Bath in the west of England. And if you've ever been to Bath, and you know the circus, just off the circus, there's a little street with a red door, and it's got a museum there with a collection that was donated by someone who came back from the East, having made this, collected these brilliant pieces. Anyway, we're at a board meeting, and the chair, Anne, who used to work in Hong Kong, said she used to say to her junior colleagues particularly, don't bring me problems, just bring me solutions, please. Of course, it's a bit of an old saw. You've heard it many times in management, but I was thinking about our sector and thinking how rarely I'd had to say that, you know, in my time. I don't know about you, but how rarely. And I think it's because the people who work in our sector are very much driven by sort of curiosity and problem solving and creating opportunities. And you know, it's just in the DNA, I think, of the people who work in this sector, that they want to find problems, then solve them, and then create opportunities and generally make things better. and that was my experience in the early parts of my career, and what exciting and challenging opportunities I had. I started life as, if you remember the term, a systems analyst, and I worked designing and putting systems in, computer systems in to solve business problems in a variety of different organizations. I mean, I was thinking about it today. One of the most sort of, I don't know, straightforwardly British examples was a needle manufacturing company in the Midlands. We put a system in to completely automate the whole sort of manufacturing, purchasing, sales, invoicing, you name it. We did all that sort of thing. But then later on in my career, I got invited by a friend of mine to apply for a job running a company that allowed musicians to play together online. And when I took it on, it was based in New Mexico and in London. The musicians came from London, and the techies were from Santa Fe in New Mexico. And I had the experience of moving that business to San Francisco, raising funds in the US, and solving the problem of allowing musicians to play together online. I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity. And I mean, I was also thinking more recently, one of the things I was involved with, again, thinking about opportunities, it was with the United Arab Emirates, where and one aspect of what they're doing is trying to position themselves as a leader in AI. I mean, you wouldn't think of the UAE necessarily, a sort of oil-rich country, being an AI leader, but that's what they're trying to do. In fact, they're making this national bet. They've appointed an AI minister, and they're really betting that digital technologies and AI in particular, that's where their future is. So all this stuff, I mean, what's the point of me telling you all this? It's clearly exciting, but gradually, I mean, you must see this in your own lives and your own careers as well. Tech's become ever more pervasive. It reaches ever greater and deeper corners of our lives. And people are really waking up to the impact of tech, good and bad. And they're thinking about the implications of this. Just sort of one final point on this that sort of brought it home to me. Some years ago, I was working with the CEO of Philips Consumer Electronics Company, and Rudy Provost, and he said to me, John, the trouble with Philips Consumer Electronics is too much electronics and not enough consumer. And that was fine, when in those days when things going wrong with tech or where they weren't quite in tune with what people wanted was a minor irritation. Society made allowance for nerds, as it were. Again, back in my early experience, putting stock control in at the London Brick Company, it really was ivory tower computing, where we didn't really pay an awful lot of attention to the people who were working in stock control or in purchasing or in the warehouses. We were the techies, we sort of knew best, and you could sort of get away with that then. But I don't think you can today. I think society demands that we pay much more attention to the implications of the technology and what it's doing. And I mean, maybe just ponder that and reflect during the course of the rest of my remarks. I mean, it's tricky. I know I'm asking you to multitask, to listen to the other points I'm going to make, but also to think about how is society reacting to technology these days? Do they trust us more? Are they as forgiving or not? What do you think? And in a sort of very timely way, someone sent me today the results of a survey that shed some factual light on the assertions that I'm going to make tonight. So we'll see at the end whether the data is telling us that Techlash there is going to be a second wave or not. But what do you think? Are we going to be suffering at the hands of a society who thinks we're just going a bit too far with this tech, or not? And if so, what are the areas that you think where people might be most concerned about? I'm going to give you my views in a moment, but I'd be interested to know what you think, as it were, before I've influenced your thinking too much. But I want to switch tracks a bit here, because it's a great opportunity to talk to you at BCS Scotland. Although, of course, as Sharon said at the beginning, I mean, you could be dialing in from anywhere. I've dialed into BCS meetings all over the country. I mean, it's great fun to be able to do that. But as we're on it's a BCS Scotland ticket, thank you very much, guys. Let's just take a small digression into the Logan review, because I saw some news today that Logan's been asked if he would work with the Scottish Government to implement some aspects of this review, to oversee it, and I'm sure it's something you've all been, well, many of you will have been following, and I'd like to know what you think of it. I confess I've only read the executive summary, but then that's what executive summaries are for. But on the face of it, I think there is a way that it could be strengthened even further. The recommendations could be strengthened. And in order for me to explain what that is, I just need to take a slight detour into some of the things that I've done in the second part of my career. So, you know, in the first part, I was putting computer systems into manufacturing companies in the Midlands, and, you know, and lots of other things too, but mostly about the practical applications of digital technologies. Whereas in the second part of my great career in tech, you know, great in the sense of really enjoyable, I was an advocate for the industry, and as Sharon said, I ran Tech UK's predecessor when it was called Intellect. I worked a lot with Scotland IS. Some of you might be familiar with Scotland IS and Electronics Scotland. For many years, worked with Polly Purvis. If any of you know Polly, she was a towering figure in Scotland IS. And then latterly with Digital Europe, which is it's the sort of European equivalent of Tech UK. It brings the Tech UKs of Europe together and the major tech companies. And Digital Europe is the advocates on behalf of tech into European policy making. One of the things that I did, I was asked to do while I was in Brussels with Digital Europe, I was asked by the European Commission if I would lead a policy transformation, a policy forum looking at the digital transformation of Europe's industrial base, you know, the industry and enterprise base of Europe, including social enterprises as well. And it was a very well supported and well funded project by the European Commission. We were able to draw on lots of external consultants to do research for us and do work for us. And one of the things that came out of that, a number of things that came out, but one of the things that came out of it was we found that cities were very powerful vehicles to help with the transformation of the economy, and cities and regions. So, you know, almost sort of local groupings of one sort or another. So it's not just a city, it might be a city or city region. We didn't just, as it were, make that up, but we, in the work that we did, we discovered activities in a number of cities that made us think, you know, there's something going on here we ought to get to the bottom of. And we developed a blueprint for cities and how they can help the digital transformation of their local ecosystem, primarily their local businesses, but not just that. The Commission, the European Commission, liked this idea and picked up on it and put some money behind a pilot called the Digital Cities Challenge. And that went very well. I came in at the end of that project and moderated the final conference. And I still remember, you know, some of the learnings, which I'll come to in a moment. But they liked that project so well that they then funded a bigger, more ambitious follow-on project called the Intelligent Cities Challenge. And now I'm an advisor to that project, and I also moderate some of the all the major events with, you know, mayors, and when we bring the cities together. And it's a reasonable scale. There are 136 European cities involved in this program, and 10 international mentor cities, including Singapore and Toronto, and, you know, great cities from around the world. But one of the takeaways from that final conference of the Digital Cities Challenge, and a thing I see absolutely writ large through the work with the Intelligent Cities Challenge as well, which I think is absolutely relevant to what the Logan Review is trying to achieve in Scotland. One of the big takeaways was that the most successful transformations came when all the parties worked together and they all knew their role. And by all the parties, I include the city authorities, so that and political support for that is very important. So whether that's the local mayor, but certainly the city officials and the political leadership has to want to do this. The local academic institutions in one form or another. If there's a business school, that's great, or more. Certainly the tech ecosystem, which I think is what the Logan Review focuses on, all the cool stuff and the like. But something that we found was really important, and I think is welcome your views on this, that's really important, is to bring in the existing business community. That could be the Chamber of Commerce. Now, I know many people can think, well, Chambers of Commerce, they can be a bit old-fashioned, they're not really digital, but bringing them in brings as it were, the real-life business challenges of many other sectors of the economy, and they bring something to that sort of tech ecosystem. Often they can bring customers, they can be the customers, but they certainly bring the real business challenges. So, I mean, one of the things, and I will get the opportunity, I'm sure, to talk to the team behind the review. One of the things is see if you can involve the business community as well. One of the other things I do is I chair a consortium of universities operating in Europe. Warwick University is one of them. Paris Seine in just northwest of Paris, VUB in Brussels. They're parts of this consortium. And one of the things that I really noticed about this was how the French university has amazing links to their business community, whether that's the aerospace industry, the nuclear industry. They and I know those of you who've worked in France or with French colleagues will know that there is a bit more of an interchangeability between academia, public service and industry in France. So we might think is good or not, but nevertheless, those really strong links. So the things they're trying to do to boost their local tech ecosystems very much, bring the big businesses to the table and say, what can you do to help us drive tech? So I think that's a slight digression from the talk, but as we're talking about BCS in Scotland, and that's a very newsworthy topic for today, that would be very much be something I'd be interested in following up with you in due course and seeing if what you think and if we can bring some BCS views into the implementation of that the Logan Review. So let's go back, shall we, to the theme, the main theme of the talk about this tech backlash. And I'd just like to explore what are the signals to me that cause me to think that there is the potential for this sort of backlash. I'm going to give you a bit of a clue here, where if you were thinking about, well, is this true or is it not? I don't know if any of you attended the BCS Insight conference that Brian Runciman ran recently. The BCS Leaders Conference. The Insight conference is to come. But he produced a report in parallel with the conference, which showed that CIOs thought trust in tech was increasing. I had to challenge that and say, I didn't think that was the case. And let me tell you why I don't think that's the case. And in part, it's because of these last few years where I've been working with European policymakers. But it's not only that, because I pay attention to obviously what's going on and have paid attention to developments in sort of UK public and policy thinking, and also wider, what's the thinking in the US, how's that likely to shape up too. But here's just a sort of a few of those things that I think are examples of people getting nervous. I don't know how many of you have been involved in European policy making, but a gross oversimplification of how the process goes is something like this. parliamentarians, the MEPs, forget how many there are now, I think now we've left about 670, I think. They have their sort of ear to the ground. They sort of get a sense from in their countries, you know, what's cooking, what's going on, what do they need to be worried about. Remember, it's a bit like Congress in this regard. They're all fairly independent and they're looking for the issues. I've noticed over the years, many more of them have got interested in tech, issues like data privacy. I mean, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of MEPs involved and interested in that. So what happens is they sort of create the zeitgeist. Then the European Commission, who are the sort of really like the civil service, although somewhat politicized civil service, they pick it up and they start to do their homework, very good at doing the research, getting the academics in, seeing what the lie of the land is. You know, they really do a serious amount of analysis. And then they will try and convince the member states that something needs to be done about something, as it were. The member states will then give them a mandate. Yes, please look into this, come forward with some proposals for this. But it's often the parliamentarians who, sensing the zeitgeist, the popular zeitgeist, will have created the noise in the first place that then the Commission reacts to. And that happened very much with AI, with artificial intelligence over the last year or so. And the sort of big step that we should be expecting quite soon is that at the end of April, we will get a communication on potential AI regulation. And the Commission's already given a serious hint in an earlier white paper as to sorts of things they might be looking for. But nevertheless, we will start to see some proposed regulation of AI, which will then take another couple of years to go through the process. But it's clearly being watched in other parts of the world as well. People looking for the fact that you can prove there's no bias in your data sets, that there's some mechanism for human in the loop, that you're, insofar as it's possible, that your algorithm is documented. I mean, that's a big challenge for people in AI. How do you do that? But nevertheless, you know, that drives. Now, this is likely to be only on, it's only likely to be mandated for high risk applications of AI, but I suspect there will be alongside it, because they've hinted this, there will be a voluntary scheme too, you know. So if you think your AI is good enough, then you can say that you will conform to this regulation, even if you don't have to. What about in the UK? Well, the UK is mirroring developments that we've seen in Europe with the digital markets unit within the CMA, the market regulatory authority, and we'll be looking seriously at essentially the power of the big platforms. But you know, today's small company could be tomorrow's big platform. If you look at the developments in Europe, it's likely to catch many more companies than perhaps were originally intended. And I've detected also, talking to parliamentarians and officials as well, and you will have done also, I'm sure, worries about the effect of automation on jobs. And if you want I don't know if you saw this, but very recently, I mean, like in the last week or so, the TUC produced a report about algorithms in the workplace. I would say, in my experience, the unions can be very well-informed contributors to debate. They've got very good policy people. I worked with them in Europe, and I've worked with them in the UK. In fact, the Deputy Director General of the Prospect Union is a BCS fellow. So the unions have, you know, they almost obviously a particular vested interest, but a good vested interest in the sense that they are looking after their interests of their workers. And so I pay significant attention to anything that the good trade unions, the ones that are well staffed and can do good research, anything they come out with. That TUC report is indicative of the increased awareness of the impact of AI and algorithms in the workplace. So tech, clearly it's popular. Demand isn't going away. I'm sure you find that in your jobs too. But there is a risk, I feel, there is a risk of these anti-tech sentiments rising. And I think there is a risk of a sort of second wave of techlash, and it will manifest itself in increased regulatory scrutiny, and it will, basically coming back to Rudy Provost, the consumer electronics guy's comments some years ago, we won't be able to get away with too much electronics. We will have to pay attention, and quite rightly too, in my opinion, to the effects on society. Now, in a moment, I'm going to tell you about some research that I came across today. I mentioned earlier that we'd got some new data in to see whether does that support my view or not. But I just want to spend a moment saying, well, okay, if I'm right, what does that mean for BCS, and what does that mean for BCS members? And what ought we to be doing in BCS? So if there is a techlash, likely, or even if there's a reasonable risk, because it's really all about risk analysis, then what ought BCS to be doing about it? What does it mean for BCS? Well, I think one thing that absolutely stands out to me is that as professional practitioners, we cannot afford to not take an ethical approach. And we have to demonstrate that we understand ethics and that we are taking an ethical approach. It won't wash anymore to say, oh, we're just engineers, we're just trying to do what we think is right. We really will have to demonstrate that we are taking an ethical approach. And of course, that's the great strength of BCS and professional bodies is like us. We not only demonstrate competence, you as members don't just demonstrate competence, or if there are prospective members there in our audience today, BCS is a way of demonstrating competence clearly, but it's also a way of demonstrating, it's wearing the badge saying, I understand the ethics of this, and I've got the ethical badge. I'm not saying it's an easy path to track your way through the ethical minefields. It's not, because society is picking its way through these challenges, but at least think about them, make judgments. That's what the professional body can help you do. And I think in a way, it is time for the professionals. I mean, if ever there was a time where professionalism, ethical values mattered, it is now, and it is a powerful weapon to make sure that if there is a techlash, we can deal with it, but ideally we can make sure that there isn't one. But I think that's not all that BCS needs to be doing. So clearly it needs to be helping its members to understand, pick their way through the ethical challenges, but it's and saying that it is, and talking about the importance of ethics at every opportunity. But it's also important for BCS to have and express opinions on societal issues. It's a way of demonstrating our increased relevance, and it's also demonstrating that we care about the things that society cares about. And the good thing is, it's true, we do. And I've been asking my colleagues on the trustee board and in the executive to work with me to identify the things that we ought to be focusing on. And we've, as well as that professionalism push, we have agreed that we will focus our energies on a few societally important topics that we will engage, we'll have opinions, we'll talk about these things, we'll analyze the data, we'll form partnerships with others. We'll be active on these topics. And the topics that we are going to be active on, already are active on, diversity and inclusion. So, and the obvious benefits to that are increasing the talent pool for the profession, but also there's lots of evidence that you get better services, better products if you have more diverse opinions and views and skills going in to the development of those services and products. So in addition to professionalism, definitely diversity and inclusion. Another thing that the pandemic has thrown up is the issue of digital poverty. You know, the number of, is it 9 million people who are excluded, wouldn't be able to join us on a call like tonight because they're excluded for lack of kit, lack of connectivity, lack of skills. They are the digitally excluded people, and I'm delighted to see how much enthusiasm there is amongst BCS members to put our shoulder to the wheel behind that. There are many people doing things already. We certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we do want to work with others. And I don't know if anybody who's here tonight had the opportunity to join us in an open session we had, I think it was only last week, where I was joined by the presidents of the IET and a couple of other people, where we talked about digital poverty. We examined the landscape, and we talked about the Digital Poverty Alliance that the IET has formed, and BCS will definitely be putting its shoulder to the wheel there. So that's the second one. And the third one, and how could we ignore this one? I mean, and certainly how could we ignore it this year? And that is the role of digital technologies in helping with our environmental challenges. So whether that's climate change or sustainability, and what a year, you know, with COP26 happening in Scotland in November. It's important. Well, it's an important topic anyway, but it's certainly this is the year for BCS to find its voice. And one of the things I would like us to do on all of these topics is not join the hand-wringing brigade, if you like, not also do the tub thumping, maybe a bit of that if it's needed, but actually what I would like to do is for BCS to shine a light on many of the positive things that are already happening. And certainly in the issue of technology and climate change and sustainability, whilst by no means do we have all the answers, we certainly have some of the answers, and they're not being talked about enough. There isn't enough light being shed on them, and that's something I would like to do more of this year, you know, so really shine a light on some of those things. So we've got just a few minutes left before I hope you have got some questions. I hope, Sharon, the questions have been pouring in. If not, you'll have to make them up. Let me come to sort of some final thoughts. Don't want this to sound like all these projects I'm involved with. There's another little piece of work I'm involved with at European level, looking at what Europe wants from tech in the future. And I was reading some of the background papers for the next meeting today, and in summary, this is sort of many focus groups of European citizens. In summary, the sort of synthesis of what European citizens want from a digital future: convenience, yeah, that's sort of obvious. Quality, which is great, and fairness. Convenience, quality, and fairness. And I think that fairness is a way of you know, things that they can trust. They want it to be fair, equitable. You know, they don't want some parts of society to be favoured over others. Convenience, quality, and fairness. And I do want to also say to you that I think in all this, BCS is very well placed. You know that BCS is a member of an international organisation of BCS-like bodies around the world. And I have to say, BCS is very, very well thought of. I mean, it is very much seen as a top of the heap, far more members than, say, the German association, certainly proportionally more than the US, although not absolutely in absolute terms, but very, very highly regarded on the international. So we can do quite a lot. I think BCS is very well placed. And I hope that you as members will, you know, get behind what we're trying to achieve here in terms of demonstrating that we care, that we are ethical, and that we have opinions on these important societal matters. So I said there was some news in today, and I just want to pick out a few of these. So maybe I'll just let you think, wait, is John talking a little rubbish? Is there a second Techlash coming or not? See what your view is on this, and then ask yourself, well, would he have shared this data if it didn't support his views? I would hope you think I would. But anyway, I followed for a number of years something called the Edelman, who I think are a PR company, global communications company, their trust barometer. They've been doing this since 2012. And what they do is they look at different industries and how they are trusted. And they do this globally. And the study, which is a special tech edition collected for the annual trust barometer, and I'll read a few things out. It's hit an all-time low. It's going back to the polling of 2012. It's sunk in 17 of the 27 countries, including the US and the UK. They say, why does it matter? Well, it says high public esteem has helped protect the tech industry from critics and regulators, but that shield is weakening, which I think was the sort of point I was making, really. In terms of the numbers, the actual drop is not that great. I mean, 6 points on a scale of 100 they've dropped, but it is important in terms of how the tech sector's positioned. And remember, the people answering this are just thinking of tech generally. They'll be thinking of whatever they think of as tech. But it's fallen from being the most trusted sector to now the middle of the pack, behind healthcare, behind retail, behind manufacturing. And the Edelman analysis of why there is this fall is because of the increasingly, and they put this in inverted commas, complicated relationship between public and technology, which I think tallies it, with my sense too. People want the benefits, but we're a bit nervous about some of the implications of it. I mean, we all are. And nobody likes it when Alexa appears to snooping on our conversations, or all these recommendations we get for things we might have searched for 3 weeks ago. I mean, nobody likes this sort of stuff, and it tends to tarnish the whole experience of tech. So Edelman says the main reason that trust is falling is this complicated relationship, the spread of misinformation. We haven't really talked about social media and misinformation at all. Rising privacy alarm and bias in artificial intelligence. And he's saying the roadmap for restoring trust, says Edelman, it urges businesses to embrace the mandate to lead. CEOs must lead on issues from responsible to AI and automation to upskilling. Act first, talk later. And Edelman suggests some principles to increase trust. Share prosperity through new jobs and skills. I think that's the fairness point that came out in the European citizen study. Codifying trust through fairness and explainability, codifying trust. And the final point they make is increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you can imagine, when I read this report, the summary of this report today, in the light of the remarks I was making to you tonight and the views I've been sharing with BCS colleagues for the the last year or so as deputy president, and certainly this last month, just made me think, great, I've got some data to support my prejudices now, to support my views, and some sort of more data, if you will. So yeah, in summary, there could be a techlash. I mean, trust is falling. I think we're in a great place as BCS to help address some of those issues with demonstrating that ethics matters to us, that trust matters to us. And please, as ambassadors, go back into your workplaces, to your colleagues, and say, this trust stuff is important. These ethical values are increasingly important. And if they go, oh no, I don't think so, well, just go and find the this Edelman trust barometer and say, look, it's not as good as it was. So there you go. So ladies and gentlemen, I've just about taken the time I wanted to spend talking to you. We've talked about the Techlash. We had a little digression into the Logan review, and we can maybe have a bit of a discussion about that too. And I hope that next time we speak, we'll be in the flesh in one of your great locations somewhere in Scotland. So with that, Sharon, I'll hand back to you. Thank you very much.
And I'm back. I was just waiting for that moment. You know, when you're there in person, you can kind of slowly edge your way back onto stage. And I was like, when do I switch it on? Because it's much more subtle, much more obvious. You can subtly have your screen appear. I was actually looking for my notes on the Logan review when you mentioned it, because I had the opportunity actually to speak with Kate Forbes, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, but also has a real digital passion and remit. There's some really interesting things in that. What I loved about Mark Logan's report was he has a real challenge on computing education in schools, and basically says it's rubbish, and we're not serving our people, we're not serving our society by not having great education in the computing space. So I thought that was a particularly good challenge, and let's make a difference there. Because, you know, go back to some of the comments you make about diversity and inclusion, going to things about fairness, all that kind of thing. Actually, that's got to be one of the areas that could help make a difference. He does that. One things I think is really missing from that review is about, there's an awful lot of focus on education at universities and also how to help entrepreneurship at universities, but there's almost nothing on apprenticeships. And I think that's something that BCS can really bring some, well, whether it's support or guidance or at least a point of view, as you were talking about on that one. Anyway, I did spot at least one hand up. Let me just check it is still there. Yes, it is. So Ian Roberts, I am going to take you off mute, and if you want to join us and pose your question to John. There we go, that should be you unmuted. Ian, do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted.
Perfect.
Yeah, well, that was fascinating, John, and I was very impressed with what you're up to. I'm actually, luckily I'm a retired member, but I take all your points about climate change and diversity and inclusion, and how they're actually not just things you need to do, they're actually beneficial. But there was two things. There's always going to be a techlash, because there's always going to be bad people using IT, and some very clever bad people. Now, we've talked about being ethical, and I'm sure we are. But one of the problems of IT, which will always cause a techlash, is some very clever bad people will always be on the dark web doing things faster than the police or the banks can keep up with. So to me, it seems a good thing if the BCS, I don't know if we work with the police or not, but certainly the idea we need more policemen on the beat isn't actually true. We need more police looking at financial crime, which I think is the biggest issue. You might mention that. And also, I'm a Cambridge man, and I was in a similar conference to this, where we're trying to look at how AI could benefit the workplace, and we didn't come to a conclusion. It seems to me that it can either lead to a 3-day week or more profit for shareholders, and currently it'll lead to more profit for shareholders. How does I mean, that's a political thing, I suppose. Presumably, the way you're speaking, we'd like it to lead to the 3-day week rather than more profit for shareholders. But how do we, I suppose that's two questions. One, how do we help the police? And two, how do we help formulate the benefits of AI, which, if we're not careful, will just lead to more profits for shareholders?
Oh, I'm on mute. On you go, John.
Oh, thanks very much for the great points. Just on the police, one of the so I mentioned I live in Bath, and I went to an event at the Bristol branch a couple of years ago, and they had the Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset Police speaking, who I see in the press today just resigned. I mean, it's such a shame, because he was the guy who stood back when the statue was being pulled down in Bristol, and you know, he's had all that awful stuff to deal with the police powers bill in Bristol just over these last few weeks. And he's a great guy. He's a really good copper, first and foremost, you know, really good copper. But he spoke eloquently about the way the Avon and Somerset police are world leaders in data analytics. And he'd even produced an app for, I guess he'd not done this personally, but they produced an app for every one of their officers, so that when they arrived at a scene, they had the sort of background information, what we knew about the victim, what we knew about the potential perpetrators, you know, all the sort of stuff. I mean, he was absolutely on it, and he wasn't a techie at all. He'd been converted to understanding that he could be a much better police officer if he used technology to the full. And he absolutely got the fact that you know, these tools could be used for good or evil. I don't know, to your question about what BCS's relationship is with police and Home Office and so on, but I think it's a very good point, and I will follow it up in afterwards. I mean, certainly in the past I've worked with PITO, as it was, the police IT organisation, and also with the Home Office, and I think it's a very good point you make. On to your second point, yeah, it very much is political, but I think if you allow the sort of you could say the continuing unfairness, you know, the shift of profits to capital from labour, in the sort of terms economists talking about it, rather than the 3-day week. If we allow that to happen, then we'll just make the Techlash that much worse. I think, you know, citizen support for it will fall away. We will see societal problems. So I think it is very much in our interests to say, if tech is to deliver, as the BCS mission is, you know, IT good for society, if it really is to be good for society, then we need to make sure that we continue to address that point and speak up, you know, on behalf of it.
So am I muted still?
No, you're not. I was about to say, come back to us on that.
I take your point about, you mentioned good unions. Certainly, I don't upset it, but for instance, Len McCluskey doesn't impress me at all, so we can't deal with him. And yet he has a lot of, I think I was in Aston's or whatever it was once. So the trade union movement probably isn't ready yet for us to help them to move. The working man is, the unions don't really represent them anymore. But it's a very political thing. How could the BCS possibly take a role in a good way when there's no real body to help, if you like? The Cambridge conversation ended up in we didn't go anywhere. We didn't know what to do. And that was some of the finest professors, but they couldn't come to a conclusion.
What I mean, you might be interested in, take a look at that TUC report. We actually made a comment. BCS made a comment, so you can find the link to it on the BCS. I think on the press page, which I think is hidden somewhere on the BCS website.
Right.
But you know, but find the TUC report, and there's also the FT coverage included a quote from, I can't remember his name now, but the Deputy Secretary General of Prospects, who, as I said, is a BCS fellow.
Right.
It's worth having a look at the TUC report.
Thanks.
I think there's something else to consider about it's about doing more with less. So I spend all my time focused on the public sector in the role that I have, and you know, as we know, government doesn't have enough money. Government's going to have even less money. So how can they serve citizens in a way that does more with the taxpayers' money that they have? And I think there is definitely a role in there for things like AI and automation that can take away the easier stuff so that the civil servants can focus on the hard stuff and the things that need more human interaction,
Sure.
and those kind of things. So there's something there, I think, Ian, that where it's not about a 3D week, and it's not about profit either. It's actually it is achieving more, being more human, even with less, and letting technology do that. There's lots of, I guess, different ways to look at it. There. Have we any other questions? Are you good? Oh, there we go. There is a comment from Tim that if you search the BCS site for police, there's 117 results. I don't know if that's too many or not enough. I do know in my role it's going to be something I think about a little bit more in the immediate future as well. But yeah, there is that dark web side of things that I think people are always going to be very concerned about, and increasingly so. You know, you see all the news just now about all the LinkedIn details. There's another release of Facebook data from Facebook. Then, of course, we've all had to work with tech over the last year, and for some people who are not used to it and find what they think is simple actually hard, it's that all those kind of things are going to put them off as well. There's something that you said that really early on I thought was interesting. It made me smile because I actually said I asked the same kind of question at a talk at COGX. It's like, people will forgive a human for making a mistake, but will they forgive a computer? And it's a really interesting question, because I think the answer is you probably won't forgive a computer the way that we would maybe give a human, and forget that computers and the systems and everything that we do made by humans.
Indeed.
It's made by humans. So anyone else? Are you getting a really easy time of it this evening? I think you are. Oh, here we go. Roland, I'm going to take you off mute so that you can ask your question. Just give me a sec while I get the technology to work. So Roland, that should be you unmuted. So if you want to do the unmuting thing at your end that you need to do and then get chatting, then ask your question to John.
Hello. Sharon, you mentioned government computing. Incidentally, that's been a catalogue of disasters for several decades now. And I take you back to the National Programme for IT in the NHS, where the government squandered billions and produced nothing. So the reason the government doesn't have enough money to provide good IT systems is it wastes it on bad ones, and it insists on centralizing everything. And that is another disaster always waiting to happen. It happened with the National Programme for IT, and it happened with the first test and trace, because they wanted all information centralized because, of course, Whitehall knows best, and we all know that that's not entirely true. Comments?
I think I should let you answer that,
question
Sharon.
For me, really.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say something quickly, then I'll leave to you, John. I think so. I work for IBM, so let's just say that organisations like ours do what we can, or trying to advise governments so that they can potentially make better use of their budgets. I'm not necessarily against centralising some things. The reason I say that is it will depend on how you do it. But let me rephrase it. I'm not against bringing things together. Maybe that's a better way to put it. So in terms of integrating, I think whether it's the NHS or other organisations, if they brought data together, they could serve citizens in a far more effective way. That's my very blunt way of looking at it. John.
Yeah, we could talk about this topic for a long time, Roland. When I was running, but we won't, I should say. But when I was running, Intellect was in the thick of all that NP fit, and I dealt with, what was he called, Granger.
Yes,
and
that's the man.
that's the man. And but just one little anecdote that I thought was relevant from that time. Sorry, I think things have changed a bit now. Sharon, but I used to do a lot of work with Peter Gershon, who at the time was the chief executive of what was the Office of Government Commerce, and he had two real big things he was focusing on: was government purchasing and use of buildings and construction, and the other was IT. And I remember he called me one day and he said, "John, I've been summoned to a cabinet meeting. This really happened. I've been summoned to a cabinet meeting to explain what on earth is going on with all these IT failures." And he said, "I'm going to tell them that they've got to stop making policy changes in the middle of these big programs." And he said, "I just wanted to run that by you before I go, because I have a feeling I'm going to get my head chewed off and I might be fired as a result of it, you know, because how can I tell politicians to stop sort of making up policy committee? You know, it's not like DWP saying, we're going to do this, and everybody in IT at the back going, oh my God, no, how can we do that?" Anyway, so he called me afterwards. He said they really got it. They really understood that a lot of the problem was changing their minds, coming up with new announcements without actually thinking about the implications. However, I mean, Sharon, I think things have moved on an awful lot since then, haven't they? You know, we've had the Mike Bracken days, and we've had, I mean, I've lost track of how what the sort of culture is today, but I think it's very different from the NP Fit days and the Office of Government Commerce days, isn't it? It's much more localized and flexible. Or have I just drunk the Kool-Aid?
I think it varies. Would that be the diplomatic way of putting it? I think. In fact, yeah, okay, I'm going to just quote Seb. "Oh no, it isn't." So Seb's just put in a comment in the questions, and yeah, so there are still yeah, honestly, there are still some decisions that get made. There's policies that get defined that you go, what? Why is this? There are power grabs, all sorts of things that happen. And you know, when you are a large organization like DWP or Home Office or those kind of places, you end up with those challenges of, if you can't do it on your own, you need IT suppliers to do it. And then you decide that actually you don't like IT suppliers doing it, and then you want to bring it back. And I think that's, there's always a little bit of unease about what is the right approach, and you'd bring it back and then realize you can't do it yourself, and then you try and get a supplier to do it again. And I'm not entirely sure what the perfect answer is, if I'm honest.
This is one for BCS Scotland next year, when the deputy president of today becomes the president, because that's Mayank Prakash, and he was DWP's CIO. So there's a guy who will give you a better answer to that question than I can.
Absolutely. Let me just check if there's another. Ian, I've spotted that you still have your hand up. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I'll give you, and Roland as well, actually. So if either of you want to just either take your hands down, or if you leave it there, then I will assume you've maybe got another question. Yeah, Ian, do you have another one? Let me just unmute you again. Ian, are you coming back?
Yeah, it's a completely different question. It was, well, one of the big things in Scotland, John, of course, was the cost of the new Parliament building. And they doubled the number of MSPs halfway through and wondered why it cost more, which is quite funny. But I worked for RBS, slightly different from government organisations, but there's no career progression for somebody like me in IT. I mean, the IT director should be somebody like yourself who's gone through systems analysis or whatever. It never was. He wasn't even on the board usually. And they make decisions about IT. I mean, RBS, in my view, its business is selling electronic transactions. And so I should be the IT director. I go to the board and say, look, we make 30 trillion transactions a year. I can cut the cost of a transaction by 0.0001 pence. That'll save us 10 billion a year. That doesn't go on at all. Somebody says cut 5 million off the budget, or IBM says we should upgrade. I'm retired now, but I still don't think that private companies use IT properly. There was no career progression to get an IT person like yourself. The top person in IT should be on the board telling the finance director the outsource IT, it's not our core. RBS actually said our core business is not IT. Well, their core business is selling electronic transactions. It is IT. I'm a bit out of touch now. Do you see a change on boards like RBS that their core business is IT? Have you noticed that?
So what that brings to mind is about 3 years ago, I was asked if I would chair a conference of European CIOs when you could do that sort of thing. It was on a waterfront hotel in Amsterdam. It was just brilliant. You know, we had our coffee breaks overlooking the harbour. It was just amazing. But these were CIOs from Carrefour, BMW, Renault, you know, and I guess there must have been a couple of hundred CIOs there. And it became very obvious during the course of the day that the CIOs divided into two camps. One camp were those who were very much steering the development of the business. And you know, remember these days, business. I was talking earlier to Sharon about car schemes. When I lived in Brussels, there was a car scheme called Drive Now that was developed by BMW and Sixt, and it was about, you know, just take the car from the curb, drive it, put it back. And it wasn't like the somewhat antiquated schemes we have here where you have a space for your, you know, your car club car. These could be literally anywhere in the city. I thought fantastic schemes, but this was cannibalizing the BMW model. You know, if you could have a car like this, then maybe you didn't need to buy one. But nevertheless, the CIOs who were with the business cannibalizing their own business, they were the ones who felt they were in the thick of it. They were half the audience. The other half wanted to be there, and all the coffee conversation was, "How did you get on the board? You know, well, how? You know, what's?" And this, I gave this talk to the BCS Leaders Conference a couple of months ago, and it did strike me that, you know, the CIO has got to be on the CEO. He's got to be part of that CEO's inner team. I described it as you've got to be on the CEO's bus. You've got to be there, and you've got to be seeing, you've got to be sharing your view of the landscape, view of the future, where's it going. So absolutely, and I think the days where the IT director is somebody who's simply managing the outsourcing contracts, or worse still, is just the operations director. I mean, if you treat your digital technology as a business like that, then okay, well, RBS haven't done very well recently, have they? So, well, you know, does it all, really?
Yeah, but are there signs that's changing, John?
Yeah, I'd say it is, because businesses are being massively disrupted, you know, and yeah, I mean, another little anecdote. I was speaking to a few years ago to the president of the CBI, who was on many well-established company boards, and I asked her exactly that same question, Ian. You know, how does automation and future business models, how often does that get discussed at board meetings? And she looked at me and she said, you know, I don't think we've ever discussed that at any board meeting I've been to in any of the companies. And I just don't think that is the case now. I think you're dead in the water if you do that. And unless I'm just being massively optimistic, but I think it has to change.
Banks are special.
I would agree.
Yeah,
it's hard to get a banking license, so it's a closed shop, but that's changing. So banks that have got outdated IT and huge pension responsibilities will be in serious trouble against new banks very soon. They haven't realised that, but that's what's going to happen. Why work for a bank where you're paying somebody else's pension rather than work for a bank where you're paying your own? That's not an IT issue, but that will very soon be a big issue.
Well, maybe, Sharon, just one more thing on banking particularly. So there was a, what was it called? There was a piece of European legislation that opened up payment systems to non-banks relatively recently, and it led to the whole sort of open banking revolution in a sense. And I got involved in that a little bit, working with with a major bank. And as part of the research that we did, we came across a report by one of the consultants. It might have been a McKinsey or Bain, and after the subtitle of the report was "Alexa, move my bank to Amazon." and these guys, this was a major European bank. These guys had hired people from AWS and other tech companies because they were terrified that the payment system providers who were coming in without the traditional banking licenses were coming in from left field, and then the Starling banks and Metro banks and the others without the legacy, as you say, pensions and massive IT systems were coming in from right field and feeling sort of under massive pressure. So my limited experience of certainly innovative old-fashioned banks, and I think the one I was working with was one of those. They are really very well aware that just a slight aside, one of the things they particularly disliked was the fact that Amazon, because they had this massive record of all the transactions that people had done with them, had much better data on which to make credit decisions than the banks. So they were able to, so they were really worried that Amazon and AWS and any Amazon banking would be able to just be better placed to offer the service. They argued, because they had disproportionate and unfair access to data, was their case. But nevertheless, these are the dynamics that are going on in banking, I think, at the moment.
Well, Amazon's run by smarter people than run banks.
I think that you could well be. So Sharon.
So I've spotted that we have one more question, one more hand up. It might be our last question of the evening. We'll see how it goes. So this one is from Seb Rose. So, and Tim, you've popped your hand up too. We might have time to come to you. Let's just see how long this goes. If you want to pop it in the chat, in the question box, Tim, we can. I can have a look at that too. Seb, that should be you. You might have to do something at your end too.
Indeed, I do. Thanks for the talk, John. I've been interested in the discussions that have been going on about banks and government projects. First a comment and then a question. So my comment or observation is that you are massively optimistic. Organizations throughout industry are still working using paradigms that have been on the wane for 2 decades, and there's no sign of that waning. And I like the fact that you use the word disruption, because I think actually something a bit like a meteor hitting the earth is happening at the moment to some of our large organizations. They're desperately setting up, and have been for decades, innovation centers and trying to become agile and going through agile transformations. And all they succeed in doing is changing the names of a few roles. The actual way they work and their built-in DNA remains very much of the last century, and which is why the Starling banks and the Amazons of this world have been able to make such purchases, and they don't appear to be able to fight back. And I'm afraid this question then segues in what might seem to be a sort of negative way, but it's really, I'm just questioning here. It's just like, the BCS is one of those organizations, and I'm wondering, do you have any radical ideas about how we can help make the BCS more relevant to the younger professional? So, and here I don't mean people in underpants or nappies sitting in their kid, playing on PlayStations. Yeah. I'm talking about people under 40, so not that young.
Yeah. Seb, can I ask what you do that gives you the, because I'm always interested in what's your viewpoint? Where are you standing to see this?
Right. Well, so I've been in IT since 1980. I've worked at IBM with Sharon. I've worked at Amazon. I've been a contractor for 20 years around Edinburgh, working for RBS, Bank of Scotland, various insurance companies, and currently I am a continuous improvement lead for a testing company called Smart Bear, who work out of the United States.
Thank you. Great. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, it may well be that I find myself talking mostly to the people who are in those innovation centres, or who I go and see them when they are trying to solve the problem, or I spent too much time focusing on, as I said, that European digital transformation project. And so you do sort of, to some extent, start to buy your own stories. So thanks for the sort of reality check. On that second point about BCS and relevance, I have a huge amount of respect for the young exec team at BCS these days. Paul and Holly, the membership director, and Rob, who's the finance director, and they all absolutely get this, that we have to have something that's relevant to, as you say, the people who are just under 40, for instance. And one of the things that Holly has done, who's a membership recently, is a piece of work identifying, sort of breaking down the categories of people that we want to be attracted to stay and join BCS. And she's got these 5 groupings, and I can't remember the names of them, but they're broken down into career stages effectively. And what she's doing, so she does have like a young improvers and and she's had an external agency work with her, a marketing agency work with her, and to identify what these are, and then to say, well, what's the particular offering? What is it that people at that stage in their career are looking for, and how can the BCS address those particular needs? So, my answer to that is I am backing what Holly's trying to do here, which was identify the needs of different cohorts in these 5 age ranges. And we had a trustee board and council meeting recently where we did one of these poll things, Slido polls. Which of these categories do you think is the most important to address? I think they're all important to address, but if you take 1 at the beginning, 2, 3, 4, 5, right through to sort of later in your career, then the 1 and 2 categories came out as top priority on virtually everybody's plate. That is the audience that BCS needs to have an offering for.
I look forward to seeing that offering, because I've been working with the Edinburgh branch for longer than I can remember now, a decade or so. And when I joined, it was so that I could bring more relevant speakers to our monthly meetings. But actually, you don't need to join the BCS to come to our monthly meetings. And I don't want to have to force people to join.
Yeah.
And so when we ask folk that come along, would you like to join the BCS? Their immediate question is why?
Why? Yeah.
There's no real good answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did join another branch's session earlier in the year, towards the end of 2020, where Holly was speaking, and she'd actually she'd pulled together some really compelling reasons. Can I remember them though? No, which isn't all. But we maybe should have a word with Holly and see if we can get more of that communicated across the branches.
Yeah.
I think with that time, we are going to have to draw to a close now. We do have a question from Tim, so I'm going to ping that across to you, John, separately, so we can get an answer back to him outside of this particular session. I want to say a huge thank you to you for taking the time to prepare. I always love it when a talk is slide free, because there are so many of them through the day. So personally, I really appreciate that, and it's just really nice to see your face as well as you talk to us. So thank you very much for taking the time to prepare.
for being bombarded with a number of variety of questions. Thank you to those who did have questions, because that just helps bring it to life a little more as well. There are more events coming. I had a little look today at the Edinburgh Branch site in particular, so I would recommend you all have a look there. There's some set up for May already, in fact more than just May, but I stupidly didn't write down what they were, so I can't remember off the top of my head. Brain does not hold an awful lot of information anymore. So let me close now, and you don't need to hear me anymore. Again, a huge thanks, John. Thanks to everyone for joining. Thanks to the folks in the branch for making this happen. I know that your efforts often go unrecognised, and it's not easy to do what you do. So a huge thank you for persevering with that. I hope everyone has a lovely evening. Enjoy what you're going to do now. I'm off to have my tea. I'm rather hungry. Take care, everyone, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye-bye.